Welcome to I Matter and I Vote because we are the change. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have a wonderful evening planned for you. We're not going to keep you past the debate time. We've already discussed it, and we will be out in time for you to catch the debate. So we want to take away any fears about that right away. But I wanted to tell you that Chi Phi, we have 24 organizations, and this is a very dear organization to me, mainly because my relative, Gladys L. Catchings, was one of the founders. And so you all are very, very dear to me. So thank you so much for being a part of the collaborating organizations. And we will turn this over in just a second to Ms. Priscilla Murphy, who is just an extremely wonderful leader for you. One of the best people that we've had collaborating with our organizations. We want to thank her and all the work that she's done to help put this together tonight. So thank you, President. And I welcome all of you this evening. So now I will turn it over to Ms. Priscilla Murphy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, everyone. Again, this is I am the change, I matter, I vote is our theme. Again, as we move forward, please start to put your questions in the Q&A box so that we may wrap up and give you all the answers that you will need to leave here excited about to get out to vote. We have a wonderful panel that I will be introducing in a second. So as we get started, if you have questions, use your chat box and enter in your questions. So let's move forward with the introductions. Rosalind Brock, she is the chairman emeritus of NAACP. Dr. Glennis Gray, she is the incident commander operations program manager, strategic national stockpile coordinator, and a member of Chi Eta Phi Sorority Incorporated. Dr. Kimberly Jeffries Leonard. She is the national president of the Links Incorporation and president for the Links Incorporated Foundation. And then Ms. Kendall B. Johnson. She is the executive director of the 2020 Census Integrated Communications Contract PMO Communications Directorate for the U.S. Census. So let's start. Let's start with Ms. Brock. Ms. Brock, good evening. One of the things that's been concerned for all people in regards to absentee voting. And so will all registered voters receive absentee ballots?
If you request an absentee ballot, you will receive one. All states do not provide for that. It all depends on what your elections office has as its mandates. In many states, the deadline has already passed for those who want to get absentee ballots. And so we would hope that those who have prepared and have a voting plan have already done that.
So is vote by mail ballot safe and secure? I wanted to follow up to make sure when we get our ballots, will it be safe and secure for us?
There's a lot of hype and misinformation about fraud by those of a different party. As far as we can tell and statistics prove, voting by mail is as safe as it can be. However, we all know the delays that we have seen with respect to the U.S. Postal Service, but vote by mail in a timely manner is safe and secure. The guidelines are generally that you will have at least 10 days before the deadline to submit that ballot to ensure that it will get to the polling station on time.
Okay, so as we look at getting there on time, what if I have a problem? What am I supposed to do if I have a problem, even when I go to the polls? If I'm one of the ones who want to go out, what do I do? Do I just leave? I'm confused. I don't know.
If in fact you have applied for an absentee ballot and the ballot comes in or a mail-in ballot, and for whatever reason you missed the deadline to submit that ballot, you can in fact go to the same day voting, stand in line safely with a mask, and cast that ballot.
So if I mailed it, how will I know it'll be counted? How will I know they received it? What do I need to do?
There are many websites and also with your local board of elections that you can call after you have submitted that ballot to ensure that it has been received and posted. If you have problems, however, there are the numbers that you can call to your board of elections to get the proper information. One of the major challenges for ballots that go in that we do not properly sign two signatures on the ballot, and they are then discarded because they're not properly put before the at the election ballot stations. So we just need to ensure that we read everything on our ballot instructions, sign it properly, clearly. You've also read that if someone stops you and puts a mark of any sort on your ballot, request a new ballot at the polling station, because if there are any marks on the ballot when you turn it in, that ballot will not be counted.
Well, thank you, Ms. Brock. That was very informative. So we know how to we know what to do with our ballots to be safe. We know if we run into problems, what we need to do, and that right now our ballot is safe and will be counted. And we should not allow anyone to mark on our ballots because that ballot will be dismissed, but we can request a new ballot in the event. So that would lead me to Dr. Gray and asking, what are some of the guiding principles to prevent the spread of COVID-19 during election?
Thank you for the question. So it's important to remember that the more an individual interacts with others and the longer that interaction is, the higher the risk of COVID is spread. So elections with in-person voting on a single day are at higher risk. Lower risk election polling settings include those with a wide variety of voting options, and they can have longer voting periods, which most areas have increased the voting periods. Any other feasible options for reducing the number of voters, for congregate indoors and polling locations at the same time? And also remember that the virus that causes COVID-19 is mostly spread by respiratory droplets. And that's released when people talk, cough, or sneeze. So you could get COVID by touching a surface or an object that has a virus on it, and then touching your mouth, your nose, or possibly your eyes. It's important to make sure that we do correct hand washing, stay at home when you're sick, and increase your environmental cleaning. Make sure that you disinfect everything, and also make sure that when you go to the polls that you see the poll workers disinfecting. That is one of the best ways to decrease the spread and lower the spread of COVID-19.
So would it be helpful, like if I took my own wipes to wipe down my screen?
You can take your own wipes, but you have to be careful because some of the electronic voting devices are very, very sensitive. So if you take your own wipes, it's important to ask the poll workers if you can use that.
So what recommendations would you give to election officials and poll workers in regard to remaining safe?
Promote those behaviors that reduce the spread. Again, stay at home if you're sick, especially if you've been in recent close contact with a person with COVID-19. If that person has been sick with COVID and they've had close contact with someone, or if they've tested positive, please make sure you stay away from them. Make sure you have good hygiene and respiratory etiquette. So make sure you carry along a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol for use during each step in the voting process. When you're signing in, when you're using the voting machines, make sure also when you're going to the registration desk, encourage the poll workers to wash their hands frequently. You want to make sure that you're seeing them use hand sanitizer. If you see them coughing or sneezing, please stay away. But also it's your right to ask them, can you cough in your sleeve? Can you sneeze in your sleeve? Make sure that you're wearing a mask, and you want to see those poll workers wearing masks also. You should see signs and messages at the polls encouraging all of those behaviors. Make sure there's social distancing going on. There should be at least 6 feet between each polling station. And it should be clearly marked to make sure that you are being safe. One of the other things is you need to make sure that they are disinfecting surfaces. After every person goes to a polling station, you should see the poll workers disinfecting those surfaces. Make sure that there's a good ventilation. Sometimes polling stations are older buildings and they may not have as good ventilation. So you want to make sure that those ventilation systems are operating properly. Make sure that you also are looking at crowd management and line management. There should be a limit to the number of voters that are in line at one time.
So what's been seen on the news, just to follow up on all you said about the safety measures we need to take for our own health, there seems not to be marking of 6 feet. So how do I feel comfortable in kind of asking someone to distance?
So, that's your right. You have the right to ask someone, hey, you're too close. I just went to vote early on Tuesday, and it was clearly marked in the place that I went to poll 6 feet apart. You can kind of distance that by 1 arm's length or 2 arms length. And so when you're walking in, you can make sure that you stay that distance away from the next person.
Thank you. So we got some tools in our tool belt to move forward, to watch the poll watchers, to make sure things are sanitized as we go in. So my next question will go to Dr. Kimberly Jeffries Leonard. Dr. Leonard, this election is 12 days away, and we've seen additional methods of get out the votes, phone, text, direct mail, etc. In these last critical weeks, is it enough for people to get out, get people out to the polls? What would you say are about 3 or 4 of the most important actions we need to do between now and voting day, November 3rd? You're on mute.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. It is so critical. You're right. We only have 12 days before this election season is over. And so we need to continue with those methods that we're already using. We need to text. We need to call. We need to send our messages on social media. We need to email. One of the things that I will say to the members of Chi Eta Phi, we as Black women are truly one of the most powerful and reliable voting blocks in voting history. So we make up only 7% of the population, but we in the past 5 elections have really been about 60% of the voting block that we see. From a Democratic perspective, and this is not a partisan thing, this is really just facts. We have in the last election, we were 90% of the voters that came out to vote. But it's important because we need to use that Black woman power to ensure that not only are we getting out, this is the most critical. When you hear Reverend Barbara say that we've had 90% of Black folks who voted came and voted in a particular way, but that was 90% of Black folks who voted. So that means we've all got to vote. So we need to use that Black woman power, that Black woman magic to ensure that we've got our husbands to the polls, our children to the polls. They've got to be registered. You've heard from our esteemed panelists about the right way to vote. I know I had to make sure that I checked my husband and my son's ballot because in DC, you have to put the ballot in a sleeve. And if you don't put the ballot in a sleeve, then it's not going to be counted. So all of the things that we as Black women do, we've got to continue to do it and do it in a bigger force because we've got to ensure that everyone in our networks, everyone in our communities know that this election we cannot play. So we must continue to text, we must continue to call, we must continue to put on our mask and be safe and see how we can facilitate getting people to the polls so that no vote is not cast. And so we just have to keep doing what we need to do, and we need to do it in mass. We need to make sure that when we hear those excuses. Well, the lines are going to be long. As we've heard, put your voting kit together. We need to take some water. You got to have your mask. You might need a snack. You might need a little chair to take, because it may take a long time. Encourage our communities and our families to early vote, and in a safe way. So all of these things that we have been doing, we must continue to do, and we cannot give up. We have got to be relentless until November the 3rd.
So, Dr. Jeffries Leonard, there's a coordinated and intense focus in protecting the vote. What has history taught us about the moment we are in relative to voter suppression?
President Murphy, voter suppression is not new. And if I kick this to my sister Rosalind, she will give you a litany to talk to you about how we have historically, since we got the right to vote, have been held back from getting that vote out. We can see all of these things now. In Texas, we see that one ballot box per county, and the counties are bigger than most 5 cities. And so, there are concentrated efforts, and now we're starting to see interference from other countries, trying to suppress and trying to scare people into not voting. And so we know about voter suppression. As a people, we have dealt with this before. This is a new generation, and to all my younger sisters who are listening, this is not new for our people. We have been here before. We have fought, we have died for the right to get to the polls. We have fought for the, the tests that have been unfair to us as a people. So we're not seeing anything new. Past is prologue. So when you look at history, you knew what was coming. We knew what was coming. And so we just have to stay the course and understand what we're looking at, and look at the strategies to make sure that we don't succumb to those things that are being done to us as a people to suppress our vote. And that means the same things that we just talked about, making sure your ballot is correct, as my sister Rosalind said, make sure there's no marks, make sure that you've got everything. As my sister Glenna said, we got to make sure that, we're safe, because, the rhetoric is also a form of voter suppression. If we don't have an issue with COVID and everybody gets sick and can't go to the polls, that's another level of voter suppression. So we've got to be safe. We've got to read, we've got to be vigilant. And we as Black women have to lead our communities through this time as it is now, so that we can make sure that we overcome all of these things that have been put in our way to keep us from exercising our right to vote.
So we got to get busy. So
we got to get busy.
So you spoke to the power of Black women as a voting bloc, and we saw that in 2018. So how can we harness the injury and not just make sure Black women, but Black men go to the polls to vote? How do we drag them along like we drag them to the doctor?
It's the same techniques that we have been using, that you have been preaching about, getting our men to the doctor. We got to do the same thing. Get that ballot for them, put it in front of their faces and say, baby, when are we going to cast our ballots? So we can do it as a couple, we can do it as a family, make their voting plan for them. Not saying that my brothers need that kind of help, but some of them, they might need that kind of help. So continue to, and they understand how important this is, but continue to impress upon them the importance of this election. I'm so encouraged by some of our brothers in some of our sports fields, because this is literally the first time they have voted. I'm so encouraged by some of our brothers in the entertainment industry, because this is literally the first time they have voted. So I think that Black men understand this is the time. You have got to be on point with this. And so as Black women, we have to take our husbands, our men along and bring them with us, set their voting plan, give them their little snack kit, make sure they have their chair, and can get them to the polls. If they're doing early voting or absentee voting or mail-in voting, check that ballot for them. because as intelligent and as brilliant as they are, sometimes they don't pay attention to the detail that we do, and make sure that they're doing the things that need to be done so that their vote will count. But we have to continue to leverage what we've always leveraged as Black women and bring them right along.
So, and I want to ask you a final question. So what do you tell individuals who think that their one vote, and I hear this all the time, it doesn't make a difference, so I won't vote. So, you know, they withhold the vote in protest. How do we?
So here's what I say to when I hear that. That's what you said 4 years ago, and look where we are now. So your vote that you don't cast is a vote for a policy, a person that doesn't care about you. Your vote for a third party, not saying this is a partisan space, is a vote for a policy, a party that does not care about you. And so if you think that it doesn't matter, look what happened 4 years ago. If you want to repeat that cycle, then go ahead. But if you want to change, you need to cast your vote.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffries. I want to go to Ms. Kendall because number one, the voting is extremely important for our democracy, but we also have, like, we're getting attacked from both sides, and that is the census side, which impact our communities. So, Ms. Kendall, what is the final response rate for the 2020 census?
The final response rate is 99.9%. And I know that doesn't sound like it's real, but it is. We had approximately 67% of the population self-respond. And by that, I mean they responded either by mail, online, or by phone. The other 32.9% were counted by our enumerators. So the vast majority of those that were enumerated in person by an enumerator were actually spoken to. The information was received from a household member, but there was a percentage, a smaller percentage of households where we were unable to speak to anyone in the household, or they were not willing, so to speak, for whatever reason. And for those, we do what's called proxy count. So we go to their neighbors and we ask them about the people in the household. When I presented to this group previously, I talked about how important it was that you self-respond, because no one knows what's going on in your home better than you do. And a self-response is the best response of all. It absolutely is the best response. And when we rely on your neighbors to provide information about your household, we get what we get. How many of us know our neighbors nowadays? You might know the person across the street from you, but what if that person isn't willing to answer? So we go to the person down the street from you. We will hit everybody in the neighborhood trying to get information, but we get what they give us, not what you would have given us. So, I mean, we did everything we could. We are currently working hard to process the data that we've received, trying to deliver a complete and accurate count by the statutory deadline of December 31st. And we will continue to do everything we can to do that. But the important thing to note is that we did not anticipate a self-response rate of 67%. We expected that it would be lower. And then when COVID hit, we were even more concerned that people would not complete their form, because census, let's be real, in a COVID environment, census is the last thing on anybody's mind. We were more worried about how we were going to make it to the next day. Were we going to make it to the next day alive? Would we fall ill? Well, how do we deal with our families? You know, there were just other things that were much more present. So kudos to the American public for stepping up and exceeding our expectations for the self-response rate. And for everyone who participated and cooperated with our enumerators, we want to say thank you to them also, because without the public, there's no way we could have reached 99.9%.
So Ms. Kendall, when you say 99.9%, you said that was your final response rate. What makes up the total response rate? Is there a difference?
Well, the total is a combination of the self-response rate and the rate for those that were enumerated by our enumerators.
So, and my other question to you is, as a Black woman and a permanent federal government employee, how did you approach your role of leading the largest federal government communication effort. How did that work for you? How'd you get there?
It was an interesting, it's interesting. I have been fortunate in that this is my fourth census. I know I look like a baby, stop it. But it's my third census actually working on the communications campaign, and the first one leading it. And it was, my goal was to make sure that we had messaging that was relevant, and not just culturally relevant, but culturally sensitive, not just to the Black population, but to all the populations. I mean, this country is so incredibly diverse, and it is easy to say just put one message out there, answer the census, and just leave it at that. Well, if you know anything, you know that we all receive our messages in a different way. And I need to speak to the Black women. I need to speak to the Black men, the young Black men. I need to speak to the children. I need to speak to those, and not just within the Black population, but within all populations. You know, a good number of our households are led by or contain persons who do not speak English well. And, you know, you have to figure, how do you talk to them? You can speak to them in their language, but a census from in the country where they came from is perceived completely different than a census here. How do we get them to understand the importance of what we were doing? So we created messages directly for them, but we also spoke to the children, because let's be real. When our children bring something to us, we pay more attention to it. So we make those messages relevant within the school system through our education programs, through our the different commercials, the different partnerships that we had. And in terms of the Black population, I will say I was extremely proud of the creative that we had this time. Not to say or diminish the creative we've had previously, but you know, times have changed. When COVID hit, we had to completely change our game, and we had to do it quickly. You know, all those months we spent on the road doing production, and all of a sudden we can't show ads with a bunch of people in them all in one place. It just went against the norm at the time. So pivoting those messages and letting people know that we understand what you're going through, because we're going through it as well. And, you know, one thing you can do while you're sitting at home, because you're home, log on and fill out that form. We do know that the female in the household is most likely the person that's going to complete that form. So we speak to the female. That you know, we talk about how important the voting is, and how important the females are, because we drive everything. We are the drivers. Our men listen to us. Our children listen to us. And we have got to constantly reinforce the importance of these events, voting, census. And we tend to, I'm trying to think the right word, we tend to delay things, right? We'll do it later. We'll do it later. Well, we finished the census, we finished counting. And if you haven't done it, you're not counted. It's going to affect the way those congressional districts or congressional lines are drawn for the next 10 years. It's not going to affect this election, but it will affect every election for the next 10 years moving forward. And if you know, you have those we talked about voter suppression. We talked about the fact that, you know, in some states, there's only one precinct, one place to drop off your vote, one polling place in a county. That's unreal. But it's that way because they're able to make those decisions. If you want to make a difference in how you are perceived, in the access that you have, then you've got to participate not only in the census, but you've got to vote. That is critical. You have got to vote. We have two things that we really, really need to do. Voting is more immediate, but you do have the opportunity to change it every 4 years or every 2 years, depending on the cycle and who you're voting for. But census numbers stand for 10 years. So guess what? What we've got now is what we're going to have for the next 10 years. And all of that, oh, my answer doesn't count. It counts just as much as your vote counts, because it's not about what you might get in the future. It's also about keeping what you have. And if we're not counted, guess what? That park down the street might actually become, you know, a housing unit or an apartment building, and you have no leg to stand on. What can we do moving forward? We as Black women, we need to understand what those statistics are, how those statistics can be used, and we need to start using those statistics in a way that's more beneficial to us. They're free. They're free. They're available to anybody. All you have to, once they're available, they're online, they're on our website, learn how to use the statistics, because that's what everybody else does. They take those statistics, they use them to create what it is that they want to create. They know what people's incomes are. They know, well, in aggregate incomes, they know traffic patterns, they know racial makeups, and all of that drives the businesses that come into our neighborhoods, that come into our communities. It drives the services that we have. It drives the funding for those services. So as Black women, we need to hone up on that. We need to understand exactly what the census can do for us. And we need to teach our young Black brothers, our children, our husbands, the men, everybody. We need to teach them that this is not just somebody trying to get into your business. This is producing statistics in aggregate that can only help you. And once we get them to understand that, they will be much more inclined to participate. And it's not just participating in census, they'll be more inclined to participate in voting. And they're tied together. If we can get them to vote, we can get them to start thinking about census. But you've got to talk about census all the time, because every 10 years, you know how quickly we forget things, right? We forget what the politicians did last year that really upset us, because we get to the polls and we haven't done the research that we need to do. And so oh, that name sounds familiar. I'll just vote for them. I haven't done my research. Do your research, be prepared. And you've got population figures, you've got all the information on how existing politicians have voted. You've got a plethora of information that is available if you want to use it. Use it, make informed decisions. And I did want to add one more thing when you go to the polls, because we know that the lines are long in some places. Some people are waiting anywhere from 4 to 11 hours to vote. Make sure you've taken your medication. And if you haven't taken it, make sure you have it with you. My esteemed colleagues on this panel have talked about making sure you have snacks, take a portable chair, do the things that you would do. Think that you're taking you're going to one of your kids' baseball games or soccer games or something like that. Are you prepared? You've got a cooler with all kinds of stuff. You got to treat it the same way, because you're going to be there for a minute. Make yourself comfortable and don't get daunted. Don't feel like you just can't stay there a little longer, because a few hours of your time will impact the next 4 years of your life, and maybe longer depending upon the outcome.
So thank you, Ms. Kendall, because this was informative about the census and our power to vote and how we get our senators or congressmen in our area. And one of the things I just want to touch on before I just go to the panels for open discussion, I have a couple more questions, is when we don't have books in our schools, can we find the data for that in the census data? Like, why aren't we funded? Those things. I think we don't have an understanding that the census impact funding in our communities. Am I accurate, or did I miss something?
No, you're accurate. Census numbers are used to determine how trillions of dollars are allocated to our communities every single year, over the course of 10 years. That's huge. And I mean, I've seen reports that say, if for each person in this state that doesn't participate in the census, we'll lose $2,500 per year. Some people think that's not a lot of money, but when you start adding that up across multiple number, a large population, that adds up to a lot of money. So when school lunches aren't available, when Head Start isn't available, when the public transportation routes change, when all of that changes because the population's numbers do not support these services, we have to go back and think about it. All of this falls back into the census. But I do want to say there is hope. There's always hope. States and cities can actually request a special census. They're not happy with the numbers. If they feel the numbers are incredibly off, they can request a special census. It's at their cost, but they can request it, and those numbers can then be used. There's so many things that you can do. It's not just, like we talked about the fact that, the census numbers impact the funding that comes into your communities. We talked about it impacts the congressional lines and your representation in the House of Representatives or Congress, I'm sorry. All of this makes a difference. And I don't know, I'm a little passionate about this. I'm not gonna lie. It's been a long census. This has been the longest census I've ever been in. But it has been a good census. And I think that we have raised the awareness to a level that it has not been in a long time. And I think that we, as a community, need to make sure that we keep that message relevant so that in 10 years, when it comes again, we're prepared. We need to be prepared. We don't need to wait to year 9 to say, hey, it's coming, or year 0 and say it's here. We need to be talking about it along the way and planning along the way.
Thank you so much for that informative information. I am now going to be more attentive and more on it about the census, because yes, we complete them, but the importance, especially to our communities, is what kind of gets slipped away. So thank you for that. Plus, it's good for grant writing because you can find the data in regards to the census in the communities that you serve. So thank you for that very much. So I want to kind of go back to to Rosalind Brock, because I wanted to ask you a question in reference to how can I become an election or poll worker? And I wanted to ask a question in reference, can a 16-year-old help at the polls?
How do you become a poll worker?
Yes.
You'd have to reach out to your local, state, county board of election to see what those requirements are. Generally, if you go on their website, they'll let you know whether or not the deadline has passed for you to do that. To be a 16-year-old, it all depends on what your state laws are. I've been on so many of these calls, and generally the response is, it depends. It really depends on what state you live in and what the laws are. Many laws are restrictive, particularly those in the South, and they're different from those in the Northeast that were more open to voting, as you might imagine, given voter intimidation and voter suppressions that are happening across our nation. So generally, I would recommend and preface all of my comments with respect to who, how, when, and where. Your first line of direction will be to go to your local board of local board of elections to determine what the rules are, what the deadlines are for your respective states. Also, I encourage everyone who's on the call to make sure that you get something. I've got this little sheet of paper. We can try to get it in the chat so that you'll have it. It's the important dates voting by state. Each state, there's a deadline to register to vote. It tells you when early voting begins, when early voting ends. It tells you the approximate date to mail your ballots if you are going to be mailing them. It tells you the application for deadlines for absentee ballots, and also the deadline and the date that absentee ballots are due. I saw that there was a question that someone asked that said they requested an absentee ballot, but then decided to go and do early voting. And when they went to the polling place, they were given a provisional ballot and they wanted to know whether or not that vote would be counted. Please, my friends, do not go 2 and 3 times attempting to vote. None of your ballots will count. If in fact you were given a provisional ballot, you can track that ballot to ensure that it has been properly recorded. That's what you want to ensure, that it has been recorded. Please do not put stickies, tape, or crazy glue on your envelopes. Read the directions that come. I have a voting envelope that I have my voting documents in. Make sure you read them thoroughly, because if you don't, you will find, to your surprise, that your ballot will not be counted. And every trick in the book, trust me, are being used now at the polling stations, again, with just the slightest mark. And sometimes the people who are working inside the polling areas are putting the mark on your ballot, and you become disqualified. So I would encourage all of us, before you even go to vote, go to vote.org or Can I Vote? Put your name in and your address, your date of birth, and you will find out affirmatively if you are on the voting rolls in your state. Make sure that when you go to the polls, You have that information. You also have a government issued ID. When you get there, cast your ballot. And then when you get home or right after you leave the polling place, go online and make sure that someone has tallied that there is a record that you in fact dropped the ballot, you marked the ballot, and it has been submitted. Most states except for three, I think it's Mississippi and Mississippi and Wyoming and another state that do not have a tracking system. Mississippi, Missouri, and Wyoming are the only three states in our nation that do not have a tracking system that will allow you to track your ballots. Everybody else, every other state will allow you to track your ballot to ensure that you have, in fact, voted.
Thank you. So I'm going to now move into questions. There have been questions coming in to our Q&A, and so Karen Rabb, our Middle South Regional Director, has been monitoring them. And I'm going to put this out to the panel. Someone received an absentee ballot during the primaries, and so because they were deployed, and was given a provisional ballot when they attempted to vote. So can they submit their absentee ballot if they believe the provisional ballot will not be counted until November 3rd?
That's the example that I was responding to, President Murphy. That person, if you have in fact submitted that provisional ballot, track that ballot down. And if you find that there is no record of it, then I encourage you very quickly to dial 1-866 our vote. That's to your election protection hotline, and let them know the circumstances by which you feel that your provisional ballot has not been accepted and secured.
Can you repeat that number again for the audience?
That number is 866 our vote, OURVOTE, and the numbers for that are 866-687-8683. If you Google election protection hotline, you will find that number, President Murphy.
Thank you, appreciate it. So to the panel, how do we combat the propaganda that your vote doesn't count? Anyone can answer from the panel.
I'll take that one,
Okay.
President Murphy. I think we have to continue to tell people that if our vote doesn't count, then our vote absolutely counts. And this was the feeling that people had in the last election, that I'm not happy with the two candidates, I'm not happy with this candidate, so I'm just not going to vote. We were all very surprised the day after at the results of the election, and there were a lot of people who did not vote. And because they did not vote, that is really why we are where we are. So we have to ensure that people understand our vote counts. Our vote counts because it tells our electoral college. I saw a question about that. Who we are supporting, what we're asking them to do. There are a number of states that I know have passed laws, and I know that that our sister Rosalind will weigh in on this, that the electoral college has to follow the popular vote in that state. And so if you don't cast your vote, then there's no way to record what your preference is. And I think that we have to all be very clear in this election. Every vote needs to count for so many reasons. We have to go on record saying this is what we want. These are the policies we're voting for. This candidate supports my community and the things that are going to be good for me, from healthcare to police reform to just being a civil country, period. So those are the things that I would say when people come to me and tell me that my vote doesn't count. And I would just, if in the elevator speech, well, look what happened in 2016.
I love it. Thank you. I want to ask the panel this question because I think it's important. Is the presidential election important, or we also need to be involved in down ballot races, because we have to look at the Senate. So would someone like to help out and jump in here why that's important as we're facing Supreme Court justice?
I'll take that very quickly. Generally in our community, we're good for voting every 4 years. You can count on Black folks to roll out every 4 years. It's the off season as well that counts. And we fail to realize it's not just the front man or the front woman at the head of the ticket. There's so many other pivotal roles that impact what happens in your local community that's down ballot. Your House of Representative, your state representative, your state representative, your local commissioners, your county commissioners, your school boards, and other commissions and appointees are on the down ballot. And these people are closer to you and how they impact your everyday life. So I would encourage everyone, have a voting plan, read your materials, find out who these people are, and kinfolk ain't always skinfolk, I'll tell you that. So make sure that you know who you are voting for and that you're able to hold these folks accountable, because elections, as our National Links president had said, and Soror, elections have consequences. We've seen that, we've lived that, we are experiencing it. And so I challenge all of you to make sure not only every 4 years, but after November the 3rd, the real work begins, my friends, because it's the next electoral cycle where folks get reared up and ready to go again.
You know, if I could add to that, President Murphy, Sister Rosalind really did say, that is profound. And I remember Black Women's Agenda had a campaign 444, and all of our organizations who were part of BWA committed to committed to bringing 4 people to the polls for 4 election cycles, and that is for every election. And when we look at what we're seeing in this world today, and this, not only this health pandemic, but in this social justice pandemic, we're seeing different approaches to different issues. And those approaches are based on the people that we have put in office, not as Sister Rosa said, not when we came out to vote in the presidential election, but those offices that are in our states, in our counties, in our cities. And what you see there is a result of who we have put in place, or who we have decided we're not going to vote for because it is not important. We see at every level now, this is critically important. And so we need to be able to commit to vote in every single election. If we have a president in office that is going to support the policies that are working for our communities, he's got to have a Senate that will allow those things to pass. He's got to have a House, or I don't want to be sexist here, she's got to have a House that's going to move those along. And so every election is critical. And I don't want to reiterate what Sister Ross said, but it is so important that we align everything to support what we think is important with our communities.
President Murphy, may I just add one more thing? I think it's so critical because we have seen over the last week 2 very high-profile men in the African-American community make some profound statements about who they are standing with. And I, for one, believe that people of color should be in every party. They should be representative and ensuring that those parties, those political parties, are responding to the needs of our communities. However, it pained me that these high-profile celebrity men in our community did not realize the impact of judges, grand juries that are impaneled by these people who are in office, who have not thought anything about appointing or putting into place justices who are men and women of color, who impact our lives daily. When we look at our news and see that another African-American man is shot down and killed by overzealous policing or aggressive policing, or a Black woman is beaten senselessly for all the reasons that we know, and we fail when we think we just go out and just vote for one person, not understanding that judges are on the ballot. Justice is on the ballot. And the future of our brothers, our husbands, and our sons are on the
That's right.
ballot. Thank you, President
That's right.
Murphy.
Thank you. And this is interesting. So we have about 8 more minutes because one of the things was clear is when voting, not just looking at down ballot, but your attorney generals, because we know what happened with Breonna Taylor's case and that attorney general and how that played out, someone of color who don't have the community's best interest. So we have to look at the school board, the PTAs. We need to see at all the tables at all the levels, and we have to vote as we move forward. And we have one final question I want to put out there. There are many people discouraged. How do we get the electoral college that elects and selects the president in spite of the popular vote being higher for the candidate? How do we move forward to address this and we only got 5 minutes to answer this question before we start to wrap up. Anyone want to take that? How do we as individuals with boots on the ground use our voice to change the electoral college?
Is Sister Roz going to take that?
I have been talking so much, I didn't want to jump out. I'll yield and then
jump out. You and I somebody jump out.
Well, first, go ahead, Sister Roz.
The electoral process needs to be fixed in our nation. I'll just say that.
It does.
It's so important because as we know in the last electoral process, the popular vote was higher than those that were in the electoral college, those battleground states. And I would dare say, if we are drawing our allocations from the census because of the numbers in population, representation matters. And so the number of individuals should matter. And so we need to do our job in terms of those with whom we elect to the Senate and to the House of Representatives to petition them to change the electoral process in our country so that it is truly representative of Black and Brown communities across this nation and highly dense populations.
Thank you.
It is also interconnected. And I think that when Sister Roz just spoke about the, petitioning the Senate, and the census, it is all connected. You got to complete the census so you can be counted, so you have a district that can be represented. You've got to vote for people in the House and people in the Senate. So when they come to say, we think that this electoral college is unfair, or we want states to go ahead and make sure that they are reflecting the vote, the popular vote, they are representative. It's also very connected that you just can't not vote, so that we can get to a place where we can be heard about the issues of the electoral college.
Thank you. And so my final question is going to go to Ms. Kendall, because you mentioned one of the questions in the box is that you mentioned 67% and then 99%. I think I have the answer, but I yield to you, Ms. Johnson.
So you were asking, I just want to make sure I understand your question. You were asking what those three numbers were? Yeah,
you gave out first, you mentioned 67%, and now you have 99.9%. Mm-hmm. What is the difference in the meaning of those two numbers?
The 67% number is the percentage of the population in the United States and its territories, including the District of Columbia, that completed the census through self-response. So they either responded online, by phone, or by mail. And then you have 32.9%. That's the percentage of the population where we had to go out to their doors, to their homes, to their residences, and enumerate them in person because they did not self-respond. And a lot of people actually wanted us to come to their homes. I know that sounds crazy, right? But they felt in some cases that it was a better way to provide their information. So you take those two numbers together, and that's where you get the 99.9% response rate.
Thank you. So I want to thank you all because this has been informative. I have a little more knowledge and more tools in my tool belt to make a difference. We have 12 days to grit and grind as we move forward. And I can't thank my panel again. That's Ms. Rosalind Brock, the chairman of Emeritus NAACP. Thank you for that passion. Dr. Glynis Gray, as a Chi-5 member and a national strategic stockpiler, thank you, because I will have my hand sanitizer and my mask and the water. And yes, I'm taking a chair because I'm going to be there. And Dr. Kimberly Jeffries, again, I don't have a husband to drag, but I'm going to drag my grandson and grandkids because they can vote to get out. And Kendall Johnson, thank you, thank you, thank you, because now I have a newfound respect for the census. And so I can't believe you started at the age 10 since you've been doing this for 4 cycles, but
That's about
well
right.
done.
10, yeah.
Well done. And I will turn it over now to Madam President of Black Women's Agenda.
Thank you so much. You ladies were amazing and wonderful and informative because we knew that you would be. I matter, I vote. And that's just so important. I know everybody who, whenever I talk about anything, I talk about how much I like Hamilton and being in the room when it happens. And I know my sister Kimberly is the same way. So, but voting helps us to open the door to have a seat at the table. So we cannot be in the room when it happens, because otherwise the doors are closed, and enough doors are closed for us that we don't close them ourselves by not voting. So thank you, ladies, so much for everything. Thank you for all the work that you did, President Murphy, to make this happen. And I also want to thank Mary Clark, who is our Vice President of Programs, because she is wonderful. And I know that she's been working steadily with you to make this the wonderful program that it was. I am also happy to know that 99% of the census was counted, because I was wondering, like, how is that going to work? Because we had done that before. Dr. Cray, we're just so happy that now I know that we're all going to take hand sanitizer, because I walk around, I hardly ever leave my house because I am working from home, but I take my Lysol with me, but I probably won't do that. But I am going to mask up and go the way. And Sister Rosalind, you're wonderful. You always are. And Kimberly, Sister Kimberly, President Kimberly, thank you so much for the work that you've done with this and given us all the information about getting out our men to nudge them to the poll. So thank you so much. And I hope you all have a good evening. We are going to watch the debate, so we'll know who to vote for.
Thank you. And thank you, Sorab, for managing questions. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Good
most
evening,
welcome.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.